Roger. Copy, Gina, very stable and no noticeable oscillation. Very good.
Scott and Neil Armstrong got a go-ahead today for a launching on Tuesday. There was some trouble in closing a spacecraft hatch that Scott will open to take a 2.5-hour walk in space during the scheduled 3-day flight, but Scott practiced closing that hatch today at Cape Kennedy and said he'll have no trouble shutting it while he's in space.
Scott of Gemini 8, and this morning's weather forecast for Tuesday is satisfactory. The mood at the Houston Space Center is confident. CBS News reporter Bruce Morton reports.
This is the last more or less normal day at the Manned Spacecraft Center before the Gemini 8 launch. Tomorrow, NASA goes to mission or 24-hour-a-day status. In mission control, the big item on today's schedule is a check of communications, or network data flow, as the space people call it. The radio and television broadcasters, who have a lot of lines of their own strung from point to point, plan a separate check of their communications. The two wives are spending the day quietly at home and with friends. Mrs. Lurton Scott left early for a 9 a.m. Episcopal church service. The atmosphere has changed a little here this time. NASA officials seem even less hurried and extremely confident. Even the Agena target, which blew up on the original Gemini 6 mission, causes little concern. One of the contractors who helped make Agena is already giving out little pins showing the target and the spacecraft docked. We were supposed to wait until they did it, the company man said. But go ahead, take one now. Bruce Morton, CBS News at the Manned Spacecraft Center, Houston.
This noon, and all clear for Tuesday's Gemini 8 space mission. Astronauts Neil Armstrong and David Scott are scheduled to spend 3 days in orbit, during which time they will attempt America's first combination rendezvous and docking in space. Scott also will attempt a 2-hour and 10-minute spacewalk, and that should carry him around the world.
In Florida tonight, scientists say that everything is going along fine in the preparation for Tuesday's launch of Gemini 8. NBC television will cover the launch live and in color. Coverage begins Tuesday at 6 o'clock in the morning, Chicago time.
Gemini 8 astronauts David Scott and Neil Armstrong are taking most of today off to be in shape tomorrow to begin their 3-day flight in Gemini 8. The flight is to be highlighted by the joining of 2 satellites in space for the first time and by a round-the-world space walk by Scott. So far, all the essential conditions appear to be right for the launch.
Postponing for at least a day tomorrow's scheduled Gemini 8 launch. ABC science editor Jules Bergman reports.
It had all been too quiet as the last-minute preparations for the Gemini 8 launch went ahead at the Cape. Gemini launches, we all told ourselves, were becoming routine. And then the trouble began. At Pad 14 in ICBM row, the Atlas, which puts the Agena, the target for our first space docking into orbit, began to leak fuel. RP-1, the rocket fuel, overflowed, contaminating valves early today. The phones jangled in the middle of the night and the engineers poured out. Later today, troubles developed in Gemini 8's oxygen supply. The ECS, or Environmental Control System. Heat exchangers, which absorb water and the oxygen, began to leak oxygen. In the White Room, technicians began to pull the heat exchangers from behind the ejection seats. New units will have to be installed. And so the delay and bad weather's moving in on the Cape late this week. When Gemini 8 does lift off, we'll attempt to take you almost into orbit using this air-bearing scooter to show you weightlessness and this Air Force backpack maneuvering unit that the Gemini astronauts will use to propel themselves during EVA. Using the AMU, or Astronaut Maneuvering Unit, we can propel ourselves sideways, forward, or even in circles if we wanted to. With the AMU and other special devices, you'll see the most realistic simulation of EVA this side of Gemini 8 in orbit. We'll be on live at 9:50 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 minutes prior to the unmanned Agena launch. This is Jules Bergman at ABC Space Headquarters.
Kennedy, the countdown's underway. The weather looks good, and astronauts Scott on the left there and Armstrong are reported eager to start the Gemini 8 mission tomorrow. The timetable calls for launching an unmanned Agena spacecraft at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, with the astronauts blasting off an hour and 41 minutes later to chase it down in orbit. From the McDonnell Aircraft Plant in St. Louis, Bill Stout reports on the mission's highlights.
Ideally, if all goes strictly according to the flight plan, docking will be completed in the 5th trip around the Earth, about 6.5 hours after liftoff. The Agena target is designed to take a harder bump than expected and to make the docking work even if Gemini comes in tilted or off-center. Scott and Armstrong will run a series of checks and tests to see how the two vehicles, Gemini and Agena, perform when they are mated. Then the astronauts take a break, 7.5 hours of rest, before Scott gets ready to step out of the spacecraft. If everything looks right in Gemini and if ground control gives the okay, Scott will begin his spacewalk early in the morning of the 2nd day as Gemini passes over the United States at the end of its 13th orbit. He'll work at the end of an umbilical, running it out by stages, 15 feet, then 45, finally the full 75-foot length. Scott will have a number of exercises and experiments, including several loads of motion picture film, a check of the spacecraft and the Agena target, and the test of a power tool custom-made for use in the weightlessness of space. He will loosen some bolts on a metal plate, turn the plate around, and then tighten the bolts. All this and more in 2.5 hours outside the spacecraft. 2.5 hours and roughly a trip and a half around the world as David Scott takes America's longest walk in space. If, at nearly 18,000 miles an hour, you can call that a walk. Bill Stout, CBS News, McDonnell Aircraft, St. Louis.
Space mission is preparing to go later this morning.
Astronauts Neil Armstrong and David Scott take their long-awaited ride into space today when their Gemini 8 spacecraft blasts off in pursuit of an unmanned target vehicle. The countdown is proceeding smoothly, and for a late report, we hear from NBC News reporter Merrill Muller at Cape Kennedy.
Good morning. Astronauts Neil Armstrong and David Scott are reported good breakfast eaters at this moment over in the crew's quarters on Merritt Island. Both are fit and ready after 15-minute medical checks. Both faced up to the usual high-protein breakfast of steak and eggs that will keep them in top form for the tricky rendezvous and docking maneuvers scheduled in the Gemini 8 flight later today. 4 other astronauts joined them at breakfast. The pilots will start over here to the ready room between the 2 launch vehicles in about 20 minutes to don their 7-layer flight suits that will be their only protection when David Scott opens the hatch tomorrow for his 2.5-hour spacewalk around the world. The only reported problem in an otherwise smooth countdown is in the Gemini spacecraft, but it is not at this time considered critical. The intercom between the 2 pilots is faulty. Nevertheless, it is functioning clearly on 2 of its 3 modes. The astronauts will bypass the fault by using volume control. Technicians worked on it all night without requiring any holdup in the other launch support operations that are essential to the countdown. The Agena target vehicle on top of the Atlas rocket out on pad 14 is getting final fueling, and that launch pad will be cleared shortly. The tower is being moved away. The Agena is scheduled to lift off at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and achieve orbit in about 6 minutes. As it comes over the Cape 101 minutes later, the Gemini 8 spacecraft must get away to chase Agena. There are only 4 minutes and 7 seconds as a margin in the scheduled launch for Armstrong and Scott. Otherwise, Agena will be too far away for them to catch today. Right now, however, the most spectacular and complex undertaking so far in America's manned space program is proceeding smoothly. This is Merrill Muller, NBC News, Cape Kennedy.
And the most single difficult part of today's mission has just been achieved. The Agena rocket, which misbehaved, malfunctioned last October 25th, is now working perfectly. In an excellent orbit, as perfect as could be hoped for, as Mission Control puts it, the countdown proceeding smoothly at pad 19 for the scheduled 11:41 a.m. Eastern Time liftoff of the Gemini 8 spacecraft atop the Titan II rocket. The hatches in Gemini 8 were sealed a few minutes ago, 15 minutes ago to be precise, at T-minus 98 minutes, just a few minutes behind schedule, but the lost time has been made up at the pad, and all is on time as of now for that 11:41 a.m. liftoff of Gemini 8. Astronauts Armstrong and Scott are in good shape, overjoyed, as you heard, at the successful Agena liftoff. And that had been the trickiest single part of today's count. The next hurdle we're facing is, can we get Gemini 8 off on time at 11:41 a.m.? We have a precarious 4 minutes and 8 seconds launch window this morning, in which Gemini 8 must be launched or the flight will be scrubbed. A 2-day scrub, as it will, because the next acceptable launch window is on Friday morning, I should say, 2 days from now. So all going smoothly at pad 19. Astronauts Armstrong and Scott in good shape. The Gemini 8 countdown proceeding on schedule. That rendezvous in space is a race against the clock, as we have said. Gemini 8 must be launched within a precise and limited period. We talked to the launch director, Colonel Jack Albert, who explained this decisive moment.
Other than coordinating, our big challenge is the fact that we have approximately a 4-minute launch pane in which we can get off. Now, the decision has been made by the mission director that in the event we are unable to launch within the 4-minute period, we will then scrub and have to recycle for a later period.
Are you confident you can get off in that 4 minutes?
Yes, sir. I think that our previous experience and performance has given us a high degree of confidence, and as a matter of fact, our last 5 countdowns have been perfect. So this makes me very optimistic.
T-minus 78 minutes and all going smoothly for the countdown of Gemini 8. We'll be back with more of ABC's live coverage of the space frontier, the Gemini 8 mission, after this message. Jules Bergman at ABC Space Headquarters. T-minus 72 minutes and the countdown for the Gemini 8 liftoff, slated to go at 11:41 a.m. Eastern Time. The major hurdle this morning already cleared. The Agena is safely in orbit. It has just been acquired by the Canary Island Tracking Station. Both its secondary propulsion and primary propulsion systems are working, and its attitude control system has now been confirmed as working. The single most difficult part of this mission, the Agena, which exploded last October, functioning flawlessly, perfectly this morning, and went into orbit. At pad 19, the movement goes forward toward the scheduled liftoff. 71 minutes from now of Gemini 8, the White Room breakup is about to begin at the 108-foot level atop pad 19. We're looking in on the Gemini 8 spacecraft. Its hatches sealed. Pilots Armstrong and Scott sealed inside the spacecraft, breathing 100% oxygen. The spacecraft suits purged, circuits purged, and all going smoothly. Events are happening somewhat sooner this morning in this countdown than in any earlier Gemini launch. The count has been revised slightly. The astronauts ingressed into the spacecraft about 15 minutes earlier than scheduled. The hatches were sealed about 15 minutes earlier than scheduled. And shortly we'll see the erector tower lowered about 20 minutes earlier than scheduled, all to be sure that we can make that precise, exacting 4-minute launch window at 11:41 a.m. Eastern Time. So all going smoothly as of now. We'll be back with more of ABC's live coverage of the space frontier, the Gemini 8 mission, after this message. Jules Bergman and ABC Space Headquarters. The countdown for the Gemini 8 launch now stands at T-minus 67 minutes and 50 seconds, and all going smoothly. Our high camera view now of ICBM row at the Cape from the Atlas Centaur gantry at pad 36, looking down ICBM row to pad 14, now silent, now quiet. The Atlas's job done, the Agena safely in orbit, getting the most difficult part of today's mission out of the way right at the start, and it went beautifully. The Agena is in a perfect orbit. The countdown for Gemini 8 at T-minus 67 minutes. Astronauts Neil Armstrong, 35, his co-pilot Dave Scott, 33 years old, safely sealed away in Gemini 8 on 100% oxygen, relaxed, checking their switches and gauges, awaiting the scheduled 11:41 a.m. liftoff time of Gemini 8 itself. And all has gone so smoothly so far to get things underway for this 44-revolution, 70-hour space flight with 2 rendezvous, 4 dockings, and a 2.5-hour EVA slated. Let's recap this morning's events now on videotape as they got underway before dawn at the Cape from our news center. The van arriving at pad 19, and let's get the scene directly from Tom Jarrell.
Here are the astronauts arriving in the white NASA van at the base of Launch Pad 19. Chief Astronaut Alan Shepard accompanying them. First off, pilot Neil Armstrong, followed by David Scott. Their spacesuits partially inflated, a couple of waves to the technicians on hand, walking at a very brisk pace to the express elevator. Then they step onto the elevator for that 30-second ride up to the 100-foot level where the White Room surrounding their Gemini 8 spacecraft is located. They're wearing spacesuits almost identical to those worn by Gemini 4 astronauts, Jim McDivitt and John Young, when Young became the first American to walk in space. Now David Scott riding the elevator up to the 100-foot level with command pilot Neil Armstrong, Scott preparing to become the second American to walk in space.
And the elevator now slowly reaching the top level, the middle level, we should say, of the White Room at 108 feet, which is the pilot's ingress and working level. There is one level aboard that. First, Neil Armstrong, then Dave Scott emerging. The familiar white skull cap, back of the head shot of Gunnar Wendt, the venerable pad leader there at pad 19 in the White Room, who watches over each astronaut as if it was his own child, briefing them now on the status of the spacecraft and doubtless the intercommunications radio problems that bugged us all night long, but finally cleared up. Wendt always wears that peak baseball player's or pilot's cap. For a moment there, you see Armstrong and Scott sitting relaxed with their portable air conditioners on the floor while some final work is made ready in the spacecraft. There was some trouble with the harnesses and pilot restraint devices that caused the spacecraft hatches to be sealed a bit late and doubtless caused the ingress to be a bit late too. All going smoothly at T-minus 70 minutes. Let's get late word now from Gemini Launch Control at the Cape.
This is Gemini Launch Control. We're now at T-minus 64 minutes and 3 seconds and counting on the Gemini 8 mission. All going well during these final phases of the count of the Gemini launch vehicle and spacecraft. A short while ago, the pilots, Neil Armstrong and David Scott, were informed about what appears to be an excellent Agena orbit. They were given the numbers, and astronaut Armstrong remarked, "Beautiful, we'll take that one." This was followed up by a remark by David Scott, where he added, "Roger, that's just what the doctor ordered." They both were very enthusiastic in their remarks. Now T-minus 63 minutes and 25 seconds and counting. At Launch Complex 19, we have cleared the White Room. All the technicians who made the final checks on the spacecraft have departed and have gone down the elevator. We're going through some preparations leading up to the erector lowering, which is scheduled for the 55-minute mark in the count. Also coming up within a few minutes will be the opening of the pre-valves in the first stage oxidizer system. The reason we open this one pre-valve early is to permit some oxidizer to bleed down into a standpipe. That's the so-called pogo standpipe that permits us to alleviate some possible pressure pulses that could occur in the propellants in the first stage. This prevents some possible oscillations that could occur in flight. The so-called pogo test will take place between the 60 and 55-minute mark in the count. We bleed some oxidizer into the standpipe in order to give us a cushion as far as the propellant oscillation is concerned. All looking well. Now T-minus 62 minutes and 15 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
And at T-minus 62 minutes, all is indeed going smoothly at Gemini Launch Control and going well with the Agena in orbit 161 miles over the Earth, in an orbit defined as 156 miles perigee, 162 miles apogee, almost better than we could hope for. When Gemini 8 does lift off and is injected into its own lower orbit today, the long process begins for the initial rendezvous later this afternoon, a rendezvous that will take place about 5.5 hours after we lift off, when Gemini 8 will make its way in space after a series of complex maneuvers toward the Agena to begin the rendezvous and then a docking at 6 hours and 15 minutes after liftoff. And after that, tomorrow morning, this historic EVA maneuver will begin, a maneuver that will see astronaut Dave Scott riding the back of the adapter section of Gemini 8 like a passenger on a space truck. Scott will be sitting back here on a platform during part of the EVA maneuver during a night side pass. During a night side pass, he'll be resting there, donning a backpack in preparation for powering himself around space with a handgun. At ABC Space Headquarters, our own adapter section now and McDonnell Crew Station's engineer Norm Scheichen simulating the actions Dave Scott will do as Scott gets ready for the powered phase of his EVA maneuver in space. Norm, how will Dave Scott be harnessed up? How will the chest pack you're wearing work? And how will he perform the EVA?
Well, of course, Jules, you know this chest pack, which is called the ELSS, or Extravehicular Life Support Package system, is carried inside of the crew station area, or in the cabin of the Gemini. It is essentially an emergency oxygen supply and an environmental control system which the astronaut will use while he's performing his extravehicular activity. On the side, it has a place to run off of spacecraft oxygen or ESP oxygen, which is the extravehicular support pack, which I'm more or less sitting in or being suspended in. When he first comes out of the cockpit or cabin area, he has the 25-foot umbilical, which is connected into the chest pack, and he is actually using spacecraft oxygen during this time. And he will be supplied by oxygen from this source all during the first day pass. Then when he goes into the night side pass, he will come around the edge of the adapter by using these hand holds and foot holds that I have here. He will actually make ready and get the ESP prepared for his donning. He will then get into this position and more or less ride all during the night side pass.
Why does he have to be back here during the night side pass, Storm?
Well, of course, during darkness, he wouldn't want to be out in front of the spacecraft or any place that he wouldn't know exactly what were happening. We have lights back here so that he can make all these preparations, and of course, donning this pack takes some time, so as long as we have it lit back here, this is an ideal time to do that.
Now, that Air Research chest pack you're wearing weighs some 42 pounds. How much does the big backpack weigh?
It weighs slightly over 100 pounds with its propulsion system and oxygen service completely.
Now, Norm, this tremendous fiberglass gold curtain back here, what is its function?
Well, of course, in the adapter section, we have all the expendables carried, and we have to have some sort of a temperature control system. So this more or less provides a passive temperature control for the adapter section.
This prevents the fuel and breathing oxygen from getting either too hot or too cold.
Well, everything in the adapter section, that's correct.
Now, Norm, at orbital altitude, when Dave Scott steps out, the temperature would be something like minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or in that neighborhood. What keeps Dave Scott warm and properly cooled and everything else?
Well, of course, the chest pack here has an environmental control system, and it actually has a water boiler in it which will keep the temperature suitable for his environment.
So it's keeping his suit temperature just correct to keep him comfortable.
Yes.
No, we're going to take a look now, and you and I will talk about together perhaps some of this remarkable EVA simulation tape we've done using a new electronic process, showing Dave Scott's maneuvers as we hope they'll work out tomorrow morning from beginning to end, all 2.5 hours of them. This would be during the initial sunrise pass, as I make it, Norm, when Scott is out in front of Gemini 8.
Yes, and of course you can see on the front of the man is the chest pack, or ELSS, and on his back is the extravehicular support pack, or ESP as we'll be calling it.
He's wearing the ESP and he's wearing the chest pack as well and using the umbilical to keep going.
Well, at this time when he's on that backpack or ESP, he's actually using an oxygen supply from it, so he is somewhat independent of the spacecraft at this time.
The ELSS, the chest pack you're wearing, is just his insurance policy then if anything goes wrong with the umbilical.
Well, it's even more than that. It actually provides the environmental control during his extravehicular portion of the mission. And that the control is provided regardless of whether he's on the spacecraft oxygen supply or on the ESP oxygen supply.
So it's insurance and a variable and protection all at once.
And the insurance or the emergency bottle is his insurance. It's just over and above the normal environmental system.
Just about this time tomorrow morning then, Norm, if Gemini 8 gets off smoothly in 55 minutes the way it should, Dave will be outside midway in his EVA.
That's correct.
Right. Thank you, Norm Scheichen. The Gemini 8 countdown still going smoothly at T-minus 55 minutes. We'll be back with more of ABC's live coverage of the space frontier, the Gemini 8 mission, right after this message. Jules Bergman at ABC Space Headquarters. T-minus 53 minutes in our countdown for the Gemini 8 liftoff, slated at 11:41 a.m. All going smoothly in the countdown. Very shortly, we'll begin to see the service tower lowered at pad 19, lowered about 20 minutes earlier than usual, just to be sure that the erector, which has been a source of much trouble and even more irritation, doesn't hang up, doesn't get jammed during the lowering process. As a matter of fact, you can see it about to be lowered, starting to be lowered almost at this point at the Cape. We're going to preview now with a remarkable new visual process from the IBM Computer Graphics Center. We're going to preview how the Gemini 8 launch is going to go from liftoff through burnout. Standing by at the IBM Graphic Control Center is IBM engineer Ed Byman. Ed, do you read me? Ed, do you read me?
Yes, we do, Jules. We've prepared a program that is intended to display some of the critical aspects of launching Gemini. On the screen right now, you see a three-dimensional scene of the world. You'll notice the Agena orbit going around the world, and here's the equator, and of course the map of the United States. Next, I'll bring a ground projection or ground track onto the Earth's surface, representing the track or path over the Earth's surface of Agena. Next, we'll bring on a line representing the latitude of the Cape as the Earth rotates. And you'll notice that that intersects the ground track of Agena at 2 points. It's at those 2 points when launch of Gemini would be ideal. That is, if they launched in the right direction, at the right azimuth, they would already be in the plane of Agena.
That's our critical 4-minute launch window, Ed.
That's right. They actually will be very close to this intersection point in this morning's launch, according to plan. We can watch another aspect of that by bringing the Agena target into the picture and letting it travel in its orbit as the Earth rotates.
Here we see the Agena orbiting, Ed, illustrating this difficult rendezvous problem, right?
Yes, indeed. Here you get an idea that if they're going to launch Gemini so that it comes out in orbit the proper distance behind Agena, they must take into consideration where they are also relative to the plane of Agena. So there are 2 timing conditions to worry about here. We can watch the actual launch and simulation by advancing our program to another step.
All right, now, Ed, we have Agena in orbit exactly as it is at this moment, in almost an identical type
That's
orbit.
right.
Our attention today centers on 2 brilliant young pilots, Dave Scott and Neil Armstrong. And in the final analysis, the success of the Gemini 8 mission rests on both these men. They're the new breed of test pilots, college graduates with extensive engineering background and flying background as well. Dave Scott, 33, a graduate of West Point. Neil Armstrong, a graduate of Purdue and the X-15 rocket plane. Scott tomorrow becomes the 2nd American to walk in space and Air Force major. Armstrong, a civilian, the first civilian astronaut to go into space. And flying is Neil's recreation as well as his occupation. He learned to fly even before he learned to drive. When he's not working or at home, Neil can be found a few miles away at Clover Field, it's called, near the Manned Spacecraft Center, where he flies small planes and mostly goes gliding. He's a gliding maniac. Armstrong is built like a slender college halfback and trains like one. He's been called another John Glenn, a designation that the soft-spoken, self-effacing Neil might take exception to. And like Command Pilot Armstrong, Pilot Dave Scott is married, the father of 2 children. Here we're watching them practicing weightlessness maneuvers in the Air Force's KC-135, the Weightless Wonder. Scott comes from a military background. His father, now retired, an Air Force general. Scott, a top-notch student at his West Point class. He graduated 5th in a class of 633. He's made the Air Force's career, now a major. In 1963, 1 year after Neil Armstrong, Dave Scott applied and became an astronaut. Like Neil, he's logged over 3,000 hours, most of it in jets. And aside from their piloting duties on this mission, both Dave and Neil have major assignments in the space program. Neil assists Wally Schirra in the training of the astronauts and helped develop the present water egress training methods. Dave Scott participates extensively in the development of the guidance and navigation systems. For several years, both of these men have trained together at NASA. Now, Gemini 8 makes them partners in space. When he was at MIT doing graduate work, Dave Scott wrote his thesis on interplanetary navigation. Today, with Gemini 8, Dave Scott and Neil Armstrong bring us a step nearer to that goal. T-minus 42 minutes now, and all going smoothly. the 109-foot-high Titan II rocket that will loft Gemini 8 into orbit in 42 minutes if all goes well, glistening in the morning sunshine near Pad 19. An almost flawless morning from the weather point of view. A few light clouds, all else perfect. The weather around the world for recovery, if it's needed today or as it will be needed 3 days from now, is just perfect. We'll be back with more of ABC's live coverage of the space frontier, the Gemini 8 mission, after this message. Jules Bergman at ABC Space Headquarters. T-minus 23 minutes and 50 seconds in the scheduled 11:41 a.m. Eastern Time liftoff of the Gemini 8 spacecraft. Command pilot Neil Armstrong, pilot Dave Scott, both in good condition, awaiting the liftoff moment in this historic flight, the world's first attempt at docking. Docking with the EVA rocket, now in a good orbit over the Earth, just passing the Carnarvon, Australia tracking station, and all going well. So the liftoff of Gemini 8 expected some 23 minutes from now. Tomorrow morning, during that historic 2.5-hour EVA or spacewalk that pilot Dave Scott will attempt, he'll power himself about in space using the same type of handheld maneuvering gun. It's called the HHMU that astronaut Ed White used on the Gemini 4. This gun, exactly like this, can propel Scott in either direction. The dual triggers, perhaps you can see here, can move them forward or backwards, or by positioning the gun itself sideways or either direction. Scott will use that gun for nearly an hour, powering it with Freon from a backpack as he maneuvers about, flies formation in front of Gemini 8, flies formation with the EVA, performing this extremely difficult, arduous spacewalk. On our next flight, Gemini 9, we take a big leap forward in extravehicular propulsion, if you will, the clue to man's future in space operations. For if man is to assemble space stations in orbit, repair his spaceships, work for his living and becoming useful in space, then he has to be able to propel himself routinely. That next step on the Gemini 9 flight involves something called the AMU, or the Astronaut Maneuvering Unit, built by LTV Aerospace Corporation for the United States Air Force. The AMU is an experiment aboard Gemini 9, and here in our studio with us is one of the project engineers on the AMU, Bill McMillan of LTV. Bill, what is the AMU intended to do on Gemini 9?
The AMU on Gemini 9 will provide an evaluation of man's ability to maneuver and perform useful functions in space. It will allow him to get outside the spacecraft and maneuver around and determine what really he can and cannot do extravehicular.
Now, we have a rather remarkable, if not magnificent, flying machine assembled in our studio. We call it the Scooter, built by LTV, to illustrate exactly how the AMU will work. And aboard it, flying it, is Lieutenant Dan Seeger of the United States Air Force, the project engineer on the AMU. Dan, let's see how the Scooter maneuvers with the backpack, what the backpack will do. Thank you, Dan. Dan's been busy flying that AMU in the KC-135, where the papers don't blow off the desk quite as much, but it works beautifully. Bill, exactly how will the AMU propel the pilots aboard Gemini? Actually, it'll be Gene Cernan, who's Charlie Bassett's replacement since Charlie was killed, unfortunately, who will use it. How will it be used on Gemini 9?
After he exits the spacecraft and moves to the adapter section and dons the backpack, he'll be separated, and from there he'll move to the front of the spacecraft. There he will use the same startup jets that are in this training pack, except on the actual maneuvering unit, the fuel is hydrogen peroxide, and he will use the maneuvering jets in 6 degrees of freedom, contrary to the 3 degrees of freedom available on this platform. Once he starts flying, he will evaluate turning maneuvers, 180s, and maneuvering from one point to another, including rendezvous and station keeping on a spacecraft.
How long will the backpack keep him going?
He will have a little better than 1 hour, both of maneuvering fuel and oxygen.
If he wanted to, Bill, if he weren't connected with a tether, and the space agency said it still wants to keep its astronauts on tethers until we're a little sure of them getting back or the spacecraft rescuing them, if we wanted to, how far out could Cernan get using the AMU?
The AMU was designed for a range of 2,000 feet from the spacecraft. This is the communications and enough fuel to perform maneuvers to get that far away and still have sufficient to get back.
So the AMU then is pointing the way, Bill, if you will, toward man's future in space.
We believe so.
When he has to be powered independently and take off a la Buck Rogers.
Well, we feel that there is a considerable amount of extension of the capabilities of man in space by being able to perform outside the spacecraft.
Thank you very much, Bill McMillan.
Houston, that's beautiful. This has got to be one of the most proud moments of my life, I guarantee you.